The Cowboys need Dak Prescott to have one of his best years of his career in 2025. Will he do it? We'll tell you next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we are starting our training camp preview. I know we're actually less than a month away now from the Cowboys' first practice. So we're going to do position by position over the next couple of weeks, getting you ready for the Cowboys out in Oxnard. Landon, let's start at the quarterback position. And I want to be real simple about this. What version of Dak Prescott do you think we'll get here in year 10?
First of all, exciting to be starting this series because, yes, it is kind of the official countdown into this training camp. And I think it's a great question, and it's a pertinent question to kind of lead off this whole series with, right? Because it's going to be kind of ultimately the question that really drives just what the ceiling is for this team. And I think it's also really good just because we are kind of at a turning point in Dak's career. He obviously the nature of the injury that he got that ended his season last year was due to him running with the football, and it wasn't necessarily a situation where he got tackled weird and his knee hurt his knee or something. I mean, he tore his hamstring off the bone trying to run away from somebody. And I think it kind of, makes you finally try to fully reevaluate where Dak Prescott's game is at this point in his career, right? I mean, obviously starting his career as kind of a more mobile quarterback who could deliver the ball when you need him to be accurate with a nice infrastructure around him, to a guy that they kind of expected to be elevating the play around him, and then ultimately to a guy who is now really, one of the old guard of NFL quarterbacks that kind of still maintains a lot of control pre-snap and sets of protections, changes, has a lot of control at the line of scrimmage to change the plays. And so as we get older, as we all get older, and as Dak Prescott gets older too, and accumulates little girls, daughters, it's like, it feels like he is going to become more of a creature of the pocket, more of a guy that is, trying to win throwing the football and less necessarily with, physicality, running the ball, zone read stuff. I think he'll still use his legs. I think it'll still be a good weapon because I think he still is athletic and can run. Mm-hmm. Relatively considering the kind of quarterback we're talking about. But I think the days of him being a red zone weapon as a runner, or even a guy that you could rely on one or two times a game to pull a ball on his own read and run it, I think those are probably dwindling as he gets into his 30s.
It's funny how much things have changed, right? He comes out of Mississippi State. The question is, well, can he throw the ball accurate enough? Can he be a pocket passer? He's really a read option quarterback, and you're hoping he can develop. And now you don't want him running at all. You want him just to be a pocket passer. I think he can be very successful. I do wonder how much of the mobility might be gone. I know that there's been reports that he's running and he's, running faster than he did in previous years. I just don't know if like Brian Schottenheimer, the offense, is ever going to ask him to do read option stuff anymore. And I wonder if they're going to limit the scrambling a little bit just to keep the wear and tear on his body down. It just feels like that version of Dak is gone, but he's transforming into something different. It's really no different than what happened with Tony Romo. It's crazy how similar those careers are. Remember Tony, in 2006, 2007, 2008, he would be moving all the time in the pocket, but by 2013, 2014, he was primarily just a pocket passer. I think that's where Dak is now.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that Dak has the ability to get out on the perimeter and to escape from the pocket and to improvise and deliver in a way that we still haven't reached quite end of career Tony Romo levels yet. I also think that Dak Prescott's in better shape than Tony Romo was, generally speaking. And I don't know that I need to convince you of all people about that. But I think, so I think it's more just that, yeah, look, the vision of Dak Prescott, and you said it, you're coming out of Mississippi State. And the thing I think about is him running the ball all over Alabama, right? And and winning huge games in the SEC with his legs. He definitely threw the football. I mean, he's a quarterback, but I mean, that wasn't, the kind of game that he had coming into the NFL. And now he has, just credit to him, the transformation that we've seen from him over his career to be, one of the premier kind of between the ears, before the snap quarterbacks. It was really a testament to who he is. I think that the thing that is going to be the most important is as he gets older, the Cowboys cannot continue to put him into situations where, and we've talked about this a lot, where he feels that pull to kind of put it all on himself, to force the issue, to gamble at a higher rate than he already does, kind of gamble on a snap-to-snap basis. So I think the continued surrounding him with good players, obviously with Pickens, obviously with CD, I think that's going to be key to kind of continuing to have Dak Prescott be productive well until it's done.
You and I both think Dak is going to have a bounce back year. Maybe he doesn't play at the level we saw in 2023, but we think he'll be close to that. My next question, and my final one before we move on, is what if he doesn't? What if it's more like what we saw in the first half of 2024, where he would have these games where he would play well in spots, but not great all the way throughout? The decision-making was up and down. What happens if it's another subpar, for his standards, Dak Prescott season?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at the context of what happened, I think, but I do, you start to wonder at what point, are there just no more excuses, right? Like, I think it really depends on ultimately what happens with Dak, right? And how the season ends and how it all plays out. But I think if it becomes kind of a familiar refrain, and it's something that we've seen again before, where it's a loss to in a first round or a second round to a seemingly inferior team at a disadvantage, I think that it would be certainly time to start having more tough conversations about that situation next year, and maybe starting to make plans for what do you do next, that because Dak still has obviously lots of years left on his contract. I mean, the contract barely even started.
This is the first year. This is
technically the first year.
Yeah.
So yeah, because it was an extension. So I think you're in a tough spot, obviously, because of the way the contract is. So I think you're committed to Dak. I mean, it's certainly for a couple more years. But I think it's not unrealistic to start having conversations about, what do we do to start preparing for life after Dak Prescott?
Yeah, I'm crossing my fingers so we do not have to have those conversations in 2026. Not that they're not fun. I mean, they're not fun. I'm just going to say they're not fun. But then we're talking about the Cowboys being in a whole different situation. And I'm telling you, being in quarterback purgatory or trying to find that next franchise quarterback, that's just something that you and we've been doing this podcast for 8 years now, 9 years now. I don't know. We haven't had to do that, right? And I listened to all these other Locked On podcasts, and I feel miserable because I wouldn't want to do that. We're crossing our fingers that the Cowboys, or we don't have to have those conversations next year.
Absolutely. I mean, don't want to do that.
No. One potential solution, if Dak Prescott were to struggle, is Joe Milton, who the Cowboys traded for this offseason. What do we need to see from Joe Milton in training camp and in the preseason? We'll discuss that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, you guys know how much I love golf, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. you're already following the action. Why not make it just a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I love FanDuel. Listen, I'm on FanDuel every single day. I'm also already peeking at some of the NFL lines, the futures, the player props are all there on FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Later, let's talk about Joe Milton, who the Cowboys traded for this offseason from the New England Patriots. They moved on from Trey Lance. And it sure seems like the Cowboys are going to give, I almost said Lance, they're going to give Milton every opportunity, the chance to win this number 2 job.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because I do think that Milton is somewhere in between Trey Lance and Cooper Rush, right? In the sense of where he is probably ready to be a guy who starts multiple games in the NFL. Obviously, Cooper Rush is kind of the standard at this point for backup quarterbacks after what we've seen from him. The ability to kind of just step in and play like that is obviously incredibly useful, and especially when you've got a guy that has had some health problems. And I think that's kind of the X factor in all this that really has to be considered is that Dak has been injured and had multiple seasons where he's been out for long stretches of time. So
well, I think I went and looked at it. He's missed at least 6 games in 3 of the last 5 seasons. That's not insignificant.
Yeah, so I think you have to have a plan in place to kind of get you through that. I mean, even if you're in a good spot at the time when he gets hurt, you have to have somebody to kind of come in there and win some games for you until he gets back. So, I think that's why the Joe Milton situation is interesting to me because it feels like, he's probably more advanced than where Trey Lance was at this point for sure. But he certainly does need development before you're going to feel comfortable about putting him out there. I think he has a skill set that certainly is enticing. It's different than Trey Lance. I mean, he has athletic upside, but it's more kind of centered around the quarterback position, specifically his ability to throw a ball through a wall if he wants.
I think
to.
Lance is a better runner than what Joe Milton is, and not
that
Joe Milton's a bad runner or anything like that. But I think Lance is more gifted in that area. But where Milton is better is, I mean, he can flick the ball 80 yards and do it without breaking a sweat.
Yeah, and so I think it's also kind of a lot of the same issues with Lance in the sense that you feel like he needs snaps, he needs opportunities to kind of develop, and is he going to get those opportunities with a quarterback, a team that has a quarterback in play? So I think that's going to be kind of the thing to watch with Joe Milton going into training camp because you don't really have. I mean, you have Will Grier on the roster, and I think you like him, and I think. If you were going to get to a spot where Joe Milton crossed whatever kind of threshold you felt there was to feel comfortable about him being quarterback 2, I think Grier makes sense as your quarterback 3, right? Just to kind of be a familiar face as a floor. But I think that line, that threshold that I just mentioned is an interesting question in this whole offseason because what do you need to see from Joe Milton to feel comfortable enough to have him as the backup quarterback? And what's your recourse if he doesn't ever kind of meet that threshold?
Yeah, and it's very interesting that New England decided to trade him, right? Because the idea was they already had a young quarterback in Drake May. They didn't need another young quarterback who needs snaps and reps.
Yeah.
But in Dallas, you have a clear-cut starter in Dak. So how many reps is Joe Milton going to get? I don't know. Maybe the plan is to rest Dak more throughout training camp.
Yeah.
To give him more off days so he can make it through the season. And maybe that's how Milton just sees an uptick in snaps compared to what he was going to get in New England. But you're right. Like I wonder what bars Milton has to clear or jump through or what hoops he's got to jump through in order to become the backup quarterback. And if he were to play a game, how do the Cowboys game plan it? Because you're not going to run the same offense with Dak Prescott that you would with Joe Milton because they couldn't be more different. Like Milton's game is throwing deep balls down the field and using his ridiculous arm, while Dak is more cerebral, trying to use his accuracy, anticipation. So it just feels like two very, very different quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe the issue is that we need to speak more about a different type of threshold, and that's the kind of threshold of competency to be able to do justice to for your teammates during a preseason game. Because I think that was ultimately the problem with Trey Lance in a lot of situations, right? Is that you felt like if you wanted to get a good evaluation of your players, you couldn't necessarily give all those snaps to Trey Lance. He took a ton of snaps in the third games, but maybe you feel like that difference between Joe Milton, the improvement between Joe Milton and Trey Lance is enough that, hey, we do feel confident that we can give him all 3 preseason games. Or do we have an extra one too? I forgot
No,
because
this year. Yeah.
It's 3. Yeah, so maybe you have the opportunity to give him all 3 preseason games, or a little bit more opportunity to kind of run some of those preseason snaps, because you don't feel like he's going to hurt the other the evaluation opportunities for the other guys in your team, like maybe Trey Lance did. So he's going to need a ton of snaps, and hopefully he's going to get them.
Well, that's going to ask you, do you think that Dak Prescott, with a new head coach, new offensive coordinator, do you think he plays at all at the preseason?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question too, because that's something we have discussed before. And I think that's kind of part of the issue here, is I think you have two kind of competing things. I actually do think that you do see, I wouldn't be shocked if they put Dak out there for maybe that's it though. Maybe it's just like a series or 2 series, right? Like he'll never play like even a whole quarter or a whole half, right? But that would provide, still a lot of opportunity for a guy like Joe Milton to get in there, get a lot of the reps he needs. And let's not forget too, they're also going to get that opportunity on August 5th, I think, to scrimmage against the Rams as well. So that's going to be another good opportunity in a controlled situation for you to either give Milton a bunch of snaps or get Dak up to speed in those snaps, as opposed to putting him out in a preseason game.
I bet you that's what happens. I bet you they play Dak a lot in the scrimmage with the Rams. Yep. He doesn't play in the preseason. That's all Joe Milton. And then they have a week to get ready for the next preseason game. And maybe that's where you see Dak play a series or 2, just to kind of, not to shake off the rust, because that's a bad word. I think when you're a 10-year quarterback, you don't need to shake off the rust. But Dak hasn't played since, was it like early November last year? Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time. Play a series, but I would expect Joe Milton to play 100 snaps in the preseason at least.
And that's kind of that sort of, use the controlled elements of the scrimmage as a kind of safer testing ground for Dak. Like that's actually been traditionally how they've been doing it, especially now that they've kind of switched to this new preseason format. It makes a ton of sense, right? You have one less game. You're not, worried about having to fill a whole game for the snaps. If anything, now you're concerned about, getting enough snaps for some of these guys. So use the practice as a way to safely get Dak some full team, full speed reps against another team. And then, potentially just divvy up the entirety of the preseason to Joe Milton, see if he can clear that bar that we discussed to make you comfortable about him being the backup quarterback long-term.
The Cowboys have another quarterback on the roster. You mentioned him, Will Grier. But do they need another? Do they need to go out and get a more veteran quarterback behind Dak Prescott and behind Joe Milton? We'll discuss that and more next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, let's talk about Will Grier. He is the Cowboys' third-string quarterback. He's been with Dak Prescott for a while now. He's been somebody who has been pretty good in the preseason. But is he ready to potentially be the number 2 quarterback if Joe Milton's not ready?
I mean, I think, when I think of Will Grier, I think of him more as a guy that I would feel kind of comfortable to get me through a game, right? So like if there was an injury, like I do think that in the sense of the kind of backup quarterback that you could throw into a game to finish it, like I think he can handle that, but I don't want any part of like a multi-game situation where Will Grier, and really, like, I mean, honestly, like I wouldn't love it if Will Grier was my first choice to come off the bench, and be that guy. But I mean, if you're thinking about what you actually use a quarterback 3 for, is you don't, unless you've got like some sort of trick guy, right? Like they do with Taysom Hill or something like that. Your quarterback 3 is ultimately kind of a backstop, right? Like worst case scenario, this is a guy who can run an NFL offense. He isn't going to get you beat, hopefully, or at least not so terribly. Can execute the offense, hopefully, without shooting too many self-inflicted wounds. He's not going to be able to make the play when you need him to. But he hopefully won't just fumble the ball every single time it gets into his hands. And that's where I think Will Grier is. And that seems insulting, but the NFL is really hard, So like, there are only a couple of these guys who can do it. So I think that I trust Grier as quintessential quarterback 3 emergency quarterback guy who could get me through a game. But I certainly don't want to get into a situation where you've got an injury and Dak's out for 2, 3, 4 games and Will Grier starting more than one of them.
Yeah. So I'm going to say this. I love the Cowboys going out and trading for Joe Milton because that's a worthwhile risk for a guy that has 3 years left on his rookie contract. But do you think they made a mistake by not going out, Landon, and getting a more veteran quarterback, like trying to sign a Joe Flacco type? I remember after the 2019 season, they signed Andy Dalton. And it's a good thing that they had Andy Dalton because he was able to run the offense when Dak went down. Yeah. Should they have done a better job of going out and getting a more polished backup quarterback?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like you're in a situation that it's tough, right? Because like all the other things that we said earlier in the segment, you kind of want to be in a situation where you're maybe developing a guy just to kind of in the back of your mind, insure yourself from some sort of collapse with Dak Prescott, right? I mean, you certainly obviously need to be able to do both things. You need to be able to like find a way to develop a young quarterback, but you also need to have a steady quarterback who can be a presence in case something happens to Dak Prescott. So I think it's difficult to kind of serve both of those masters at the same time. And I do think that Joe Milton represents a guy who, finds a nice balance between those two things where if you feel like you can develop him just a little bit, maybe he's the guy that, can get you through a couple games if you have a very specific game plan and he's, good at kind of sitting and following instructions as he develops and learns, the game a little bit more. But look, I mean, I think if you wanted to go out and get a guy, you were going to pay money for one. And I don't know that,
Can I give you some names? Let me give you some names that are out there. So there was
please.
If you wanted a younger guy, like Mac Jones was available. And I know Mac Jones is not the sexiest option, but he actually played pretty decent for Jacksonville last year. You could have signed Mac Jones to a cheap deal. Gardner Minshew was a quarterback that was available. Joe Flacco was available for a while. Again, I know none of those quarterbacks are long-term options, but with Dak's health and maybe with his team, do you feel like you needed to go out and get somebody who is not so high variance with Joe Milton, or maybe you try to do both? Maybe you can't have both quarterbacks on your roster because there's not enough snaps to go around. But I wonder if this is the wrong philosophy of going with Milton rather than one of those guys. It's a little bit more established.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a question. I think that they certainly tried the other way, and they had some success, in the sense that they got the backup quarterbacks part of it right, but maybe they didn't get the developmental quarterback part of it right. So I don't know. I think that they still have. I think you may be right that this is a little bit of a gamble, but I think that the backstop, the worst case scenario here, is that instead of getting Gardner Minshew, you get Carson Wentz, or one of these guys who's available now, and the difference between that and the guys that are available on the street, it probably isn't that big of a difference ultimately at the end of the day. And you're willing to risk that in the sense of to try to see if you can develop Joe Milton something better.
Or maybe they just felt like, what good has it done us to have Cooper Rush? I mean, Cooper Rush did a really good job in 2022. Don't get me wrong. Like he kept them afloat. He won 5-1, but maybe they looked at the way that last year went, where yes, they won a couple games down the stretch, but in hindsight, I'm not advocating for tanking, but would they have been better off just to play Trey Lance during that whole stretch and then get to the number 6 pick? And we're talking about a whole different team.
And Joe Milton's a better player than that too. Than Trey Lance.
I agree. Yes.
So I think that he at least could give you competent play in some sense where maybe you're not, maybe you're not quite organically tanking, but you're at least, developing a guy while letting him take his level. Look, I mean, we just talked about how he needed to take snaps. And so trying to go out and find a veteran guy, and I understand it's at the cost of potentially winning football games, but at what cost? What is that a cost when Dak's out for long term? So yeah. I think that there is something to this plan that makes sense. I think you could make arguments doing it a couple different ways. They've done it the other way before. And yeah, the question is, how much ultimately did it help their cause at the end of the day that the head coach got fired and a lot of different things happened. So I think they're just trying something new this time.
All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Check out the channel on YouTube, download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. On tomorrow's show, we're talking running backs heading into the Cowboys preseason and training camp. We'll see you right back here on Tuesday.